What on earth is this?
This is Dresden, a historic city in the far east of Germany, not far from the Czech border. A major industrial centre for centuries, though one that has always had a reputation for being incredibly beautiful, it is currently the 12th largest city in Germany and is famous for its picturesque surroundings, its gorgeous cobbled streets, and nothing else. I'm only joking, obviously. Any history buffs out there will know that Dresden was of course the site of one of the most pivotal, controversial and talked about events of the 20th century, the construction of the world's only suspended funicular. At the turn of the century, and specifically between 1895 and 1907, Germany underwent a pretty extraordinary industrial boom that necessitated and facilitated the construction of a number of innovative, experimental public transit projects around the country. As a result of this age of engineering, we were treated to a host of classic German transit inventions that remain in use to this day, such as the Daimler Einspur, the Flocken Elektrowagen, and who could forget the Lilienthal Normalsegelapparat? I mean, have you truly travelled until you've done it on a Laufmaschine? Obviously, none of these actually stood the test of time, but one style of transportation that saw an explosion in popularity around this time is in fact still a mainstay of many cities in Germany, and that is the humble funicular. Although the first funicular for public use was actually opened in France in 1862, just to clarify. And just for the absence of doubt, a funicular is a steep mountain railway operating with a cable with two counterbalanced carriages. You might have seen them called a cable railway before, or even the wildly incorrect ropeway, which is a completely different thing. Everyone was metaphorically hopping on the funicular train at the turn of the century, and by the time World War II rolled around, there were about 60 operational funiculars across the country, 40 of which are still operational today, and one of them is very, very special. This is the Dresden Schwebebahn, running between Loschwitz and Oberloschwitz on the outskirts of Dresden. I suppose I already gave away earlier in the video that this is the only suspended funicular in the world. And not only that, it has always been the only one. This design was never replicated anywhere else. For the cable railway laymen among you, suspended simply means the track is above the carriage, with the carriage hanging down below. Now you know. But yes, this strange masterpiece of German civil engineering was opened in 1901, right next door to the Dresden Standseilbahn, a more boring funicular that opened in 1895. See, I told you these Germans were mad about funiculars. They apparently needed two to serve the same tiny village. 1901 was also the same year as the opening of the Wuppertal Schwebebahn, a very similar suspension railway, not a funicular, which everyone and their mum has already made a video about, so I'm not going to. The Dresden Schwebebahn was the brainchild of Eugen Langen, who also created the Wuppertal Schwebebahn. Was this guy just going around Germany going, no guys, I swear this dangling train thing is going to catch on? Also in his spare time, he patented a method of making sugar cubes. Nice. Also, isn't it weird that when it's spelled like this, it's Eugene, in English at least, but when it's spelled like this, it's Eugen? I'm getting very sidetracked. Either way, Langen was convinced of the benefits of suspended railways, as he was possibly within his rights to be. When you look at the Wuppertal Schwebebahn, its suspended format allowed it to not only have a very small footprint with only the supports touching the ground, but also meant that it could follow the path of the river, avoiding taking up valuable urban space and negating the need for tons of terraforming or excavation. Although it never caught on, apart from a couple of examples in Dortmund and Japan, it's self-evidently a pretty sensible system with obvious benefits. But the Dresden Schwebebahn? I poured through every item of written material at the on-site museum at the funicular, and I could not for the life of me figure out why this was created as a suspended railway. At one point, I even asked ChatGPT what the benefits of suspension funiculars are, and it gave me a bunch of answers about Wuppertal. I was like, yeah, no, I know about that one, plus it's not a funicular, but what about the Dresden Schwebebahn? And it responded, you're right to question the rationale behind using a suspended design for the Dresden Schwebebahn. Basically the ChatGPT equivalent of, mate, I don't know, stop asking me about funiculars. It also said, perhaps its pointlessness adds to the appeal. Absolutely savage from ChatGPT. You want to know the saddest part of all this? Having planned out the Dresden and Wuppertal Schwebebahns after convincing everyone that they would be better than regular trains or funiculars, Eugen Langen only went and died in 1895, 6 years before either of them were opened. What a weird legacy to leave. So yes, in 1901 his dream was posthumously realised, and the Dresden Schwebebahn opened to the public, though few statistics have survived regarding its daily usage from this time. So was it a useful experiment? Who knows? It was certainly quite a unique design. You see all these pillars? Only one of them, the 24th of the 33, is fixed in place as an anchor support, and the rest are all pendulum supports. In case you're as confused as I was until I saw it in person, this doesn't mean that the pendulum supports don't touch the ground, which I stupidly thought. but instead that they are fixed at the bottom and can sway at the top, allowing the rail to shift in line with stress from the moving trains and adjust to Dresden's dramatic seasonal changes in temperature. It initially ran on steam until 1909, when an electric motor was added, and served as quite a unique attraction, though unlike many other funiculars around Germany at the time, it didn't actually have much practical use. There wasn't much at the top for one funicular to serve, so to have two up there seemed a little pointless, and soon the owners, Electra AG, noticed this, so they built a restaurant at the top. Yes, that's right, they built a funicular that didn't serve anything, so they had to construct something for it to serve after it had already been open for a few years. The museum posits that the original point of both funiculars was to encourage the construction of more urban development on the hill, but this is merely a theory, and it didn't seem to work anyway. In 1912, the Schwebebahn was sold to the local authority, and it went trundling up and down the hill for a few decades, going about its business nonchalantly. As a side note, weirdly, the name of this thing is actually a point of contention. Though you will most likely find it referred to by locals as the Schwebebahn, literally floating railway, it's also been referred to as the Sail Schwebebahn, cable floating railway, the Berg Schwebebahn, mountain floating railway, the Schienenschwebebahn, floating rail railway, and the Berg Schienenschwebebahn, mountain floating rail railway. But forget all of that nonsense, because in 1941, and you definitely would have thought that the Germans would have more important things to be focusing on at this time, it was apparently officially given the name Schwebeseilbahn, or Floating Cable Railway. And at this point, can any Germans please tell me how Schwebeseilbahn, Floating Cable Railway, is any different from the aforementioned Sail Schwebebahn, Cable Floating Railway? I don't get it. And yes, now that our story has reached the 1940s, well, we've got to talk about it now, haven't we? The Second World War was an extremely bleak time for Dresden. I won't go over all the details, as far more learned people than me have made far more informative videos about the bombing of Dresden. But basically, right at the very end of the war, but crucially, before it was actually over, the Allies launched an enormous firebombing campaign on the city, with later declassified documents citing it as a legitimate military target due to its industrial importance to the Nazi regime. As per the city's official findings, and not those of Joseph Goebbels, David Irving, or Kurt Vonnegut, around 25,000 civilians were killed in the bombing, and 90% of the city was destroyed. The event, as I'm sure all of you are very aware, remains extremely controversial. But flame war in the comments about whether or not Dresden was a legitimate military target aside, the long and short of it is that the entire center of this once glorious city was almost totally obliterated by the bombings.
But this isn't the city center, and as a result, this thing, this one-of-a-kind engineering marvel, survived the war and continues to ferry passengers up and down this hillside in eastern Dresden to this day.
I mean, its age isn't really the most important thing, as the older Standseilbahn is literally a 2-minute walk down the road, but that's just a regular one, so it doesn't get a video, I'm afraid. I mean, it does get into the video here, but only for a moment. Just leave me alone. For all its engineering glory, it makes sense that this design was never replicated. I mean, look at it. Compared to a regular funicular, that is a lot of steel. These sorts of floating funiculars are extremely resource intensive and don't really do anything that a regular one couldn't do, except wow you with their incredible speed. But don't get me wrong, as a man with an eye for a funicular, this is easily the coolest one I've seen, and well worth a visit. So if you're ever in Dresden, you must take a bike out to the edge of the city to take a trip on the Schwebebahn.